Europe, there's a heightened level of desperation and need. Besides the humanitarian crisis, governments are grappling with security concerns from unchecked immigrants crossing the porous borders. Friday, one United Nations official said it's just the tip of the iceberg. Full Measure correspondent Scott Thuman traveled to one of the most squalid camps on the European continent.
It is known by one name, the Jungle, a refugee camp on the outskirts of Calais, France, the last stop before getting to England and the last hope for thousands. It is sadly one of many, from the masses in Hungary to those in Germany, Austria to Lebanon, each border hosting its own crisis, a crush of people that can't be controlled and yet won't be stopped. Back in Calais, they risk their lives in nightly attempts to leave. Here we witness a group make the 2-hour trek, hoping to sneak aboard a train headed for Great Britain. Every morning, a slightly smaller group returns. A few, it seems, have made it across.
You said you know people who've done that, who've gotten away?
Yeah, some of our friends, yeah, they have.
Yeah. All the way to the UK?
Yeah. Scotland, London, Manchester, United, Liverpool, all of them, they are there.
More often than not, it seems they are caught, despite what would almost literally seem a needle in a haystack challenge for police, who on this day we watch find 2 women stowed away in a semi-truck.
How long were you in the truck?
10 hours.
Across the region, nations' walls go up. The added fencing, barbed wire, and constant police presence are needed because many say there's just no way of knowing who is among these camps, a sort of quality control.
You don't want anyone to come through who is coming into this country because they are part of a terror gang, and we cannot be blind to the fact that threat exists. We know there are people who are working with ISIL in the Middle East, who want to plan and are actively seeking to plan, terror attacks on the UK and other Western countries.
And there is another factor here.
Refugees tell me that they escape the so-called jungle successfully every single day, whether it's by getting through the barbed wire and onto trucks or ferries, or something even more extreme.
Traffickers. Nathan Johnston is a volunteer medic here.
And you hear much about the smugglers?
Not really, they're very guarded because obviously the smugglers have a lot to lose and they're quite powerful people.
That is an international criminal group of people that has to be cracked down on as well, and that is another very important part of our response.
Because they're not just going to bring across a refugee who has money, they will also bring across people who would come here perhaps to do harm.
Well, I think they're people without scruple.
A daunting effect that halts the asylum process for refugees like Ali Ibrahim. Ali claims he was a sniper in the Syrian army, but rather than keep killing, he quit. So he was tortured by Assad's men, he says, and made sure he couldn't shoot again for either side.
See the bone?
So they beat him with a hammer?
Something like that, yes. That's him what you said, yes, with a hammer.
The stories are countless.
I'm being honest, everyone's sacrifice. Everyone's same. But you have children as well. You have women pregnant. And same, you have people diabetic. Like people is cooking in dirty water, plenty of bacteria, no hygiene.
Few say there is hard evidence that terrorists are getting past police and onto British-bound trains or stowing away in semis, but there's truly no way of knowing who is. One ISIL claim, 4,000 jihadists have snuck through. A Lebanese government official suggests 1 in 50 are operatives.
There's a lot of people coming every day. I don't know where I come from. You don't know me who I am. That's the problem.
It's not really black and white on that. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So I can't really comment on that. And I've treated lots of different people here and with lots of different political views.
As varied as they might be, they do have one common thread: desperation and the yearning to do whatever it takes to find a new home. Not willing to accept that the many nations now deciding their fate are at a crossroads, and the wait an unbearable one.
Some worry the refugees entering Europe and the U.S. pose a current risk. Scott Thuman reporting from Europe found some believe the real danger may be decades in the making.
One look at the growing refugee crisis across Europe and the Middle East, and you quickly realize this problem is not going away.
How many people are living in here?
About 100.
100 people in this tent.
And the influx is so determined to call a new country home, they dig in for the long haul. Even in a camp so squalid, so rancid with disease and despair, it is known as the jungle.
We want a safe country. a safe country.
Ebnandizar was a teacher in Syria who says he fled when a bomb hit, killing 15 of his students, with nothing to return to but threats.
From the army, want to kill us, kill my family.
There's no way of knowing just who's been living here, or for that matter, even how many. Low estimates are around 1,500. We've heard as high as 5,000. And that confusion is a big part of the problem. To what degree can the average person or a member of law enforcement have any confidence that they know exactly who they're dealing with?
The risk is obvious that this flow of refugees will be used by organizations like Islamic State to infiltrate operatives into Western societies.
But it's not this generation of refugees that pose the greatest threat, says Harris Rafiq of the Quilliam Foundation.
What worries me is that the people that are coming over in terms of the adults will be okay. But if we learned a lesson from what happened with the migrants that came over post-World War II in Europe, their youngsters or their grandchildren may be people that can be targeted much more easily by Salafist and jihadists because there is a potential lack of identities.
As a result, he says America needs to change tactics from countering attacks to preventing them.
I think in the US, there's a sleeping giant in terms of terrorism.
I'm not sure that there's a real risk of radicalization of refugees, to be honest, because those people who have come here, in most cases, in fact, in all cases, they've come because they know that we are a safe, democratic country and they admire those principles.
Zoe Gardner, who helps refugees gain asylum, like in this London neighborhood, says there have to be more than just jobs. There have to be open arms.
Because we're talking about people who, you know, in a large proportion of cases may have experienced torture, arbitrary detention, been through war, seen unthinkable horrors.
But refusing refugees altogether, some warn, could be the real pitfall, prompting radicalization in the future by anyone turning their backs now.
You know, the greater evil arises from not taking these people. If the message goes out for the United States and Western Europe, Muslim lives are worth nothing, that is a message that in the long term can resonate much more powerfully.
And Cheryl, he adds that not taking refugees creates both a political and a cultural karma that could come back to haunt us in all sorts of ways.
What do you think is the perception overseas about the U.S. role at the crisis?
Well, to be honest, a lot of criticism. People kept telling me when I was over there, they believe the U.S. isn't doing enough, should be more to take on refugees. Important to note, though, the U.S. has given about $4.2 billion in aid so far. That's more than any other country has.
And we're accepting quite a few in the coming year or so.
Yeah, the plan 10,000 just in the next year.
Thanks, Scott.
The images of despair, the frenzy, immigrants fleeing war and anxious to call Europe their new home, have been seen around the world. What many may not have seen is the invisible side effect of it all, a potential that has put all of Europe in crisis mode.
We have to tell the world that this is over, we will close our borders, and we won't let anybody in now for a while.
People who disagree with you, who are on the complete opposite side, think that your way of thinking is inhuman, it's insensitive, it's unfair.
It is, of course, very hard sometimes to speak out the truth. But the truth is that we can't solve the problems of the world, and we can't solve the problems of all the poor people in the world.
The seemingly harsh tone taken by Beatrix von Stoy, deputy of Germany's right-wing Alternative for Deutschland party, has become part of a booming chorus. Rallies have become violent, even sparked more public revitalization of neo-Nazi groups who see their continent changing, edging toward a possibly historic chasm. Is this one of the biggest crises Germany has seen since World War II?
I think this is the biggest crisis Europe has seen ever since the last war, yes.
And perhaps no city in Europe is a better example than Berlin, where in another time a tide of refugees fleeing from east to west created a dividing line that lasted for decades.
This is one of the last remnants of the Berlin Wall. Ever since the Iron Curtain fell 26 years ago, Europeans have proudly enjoyed the freedom to go from country to country. But now, in light of new worries over terrorism and immigration, new types of barriers are going up.
From Hungary to Croatia to Slovenia, workers erect wire fencing, and passport checks have been reinstituted at borders in France, Germany, and Austria.
We still want to help, but the numbers are too high now. Several thousand people coming to Germany every day in a quite unregulated manner, people crossing European borders with no right to cross them. So we have to restore law and order in this process.
Gunter Krings is a state secretary for the interior in Germany and says the offer to take in up to 1 million refugees in 2015 meant taking the lid off a jar they can no longer close, not without what some would consider drastic measures.
The Schengen Agreement is in danger. We have to be quite frank about it.
The Schengen Agreement, created back in 1985, began the process of dissolving borders between more than 24 European countries. That allowed for free travel and, more importantly, free trade. The prospects of now limiting either could bring disaster to the European Union, already facing economic stress by raising the cost for business, deterring tourists, and making it harder for people to live in one EU country and work in another.
The European Commission, quite frankly, looked the other way for years.
That dilemma between a need for security, saving free trade, and refugees has put Germany's once popular Chancellor Angela Merkel in peril on her home turf. In the U.S. and France, the press named her Person of the Year. But the woman the refugees call Mama Merkel is not winning hearts at home. Extreme and neo-Nazi groups kept in the shadows for decades are re-emerging, loudly demanding her resignation. Journalist and author Olaf Sundermeyer has been studying the rise of radical groups.
We have a strong right-wing movement in Germany for years, but it always has been under control by the police, by civil society, by political parties, by us, the media. But now you have a merge, people come together. You have this really hardcore neo-Nazis, people that are violent, that are willing to burn refugees' homes or attack migrants or homosexuals on the street. And then you have on the other side people from the middle of the society that have their concerns towards the United States, towards refugees, towards all these things. And these people now get together, which was absolutely not possible since World War II in Germany.
An irony no more evident than here at the old Stasi headquarters. The signs from East Germany's most feared spy agency still on the walls, but behind the doors, Syrian refugees. A staggering 900 immigrants from the Middle East and Africa filled the old spy office, now run by the Red Cross, in just 3 days.
We have no name, we have no paper, we cannot go to doctor, we cannot go to anywhere, we are just number.
Bassem Haritani's family, sharing a pair of bunk beds, is from Aleppo. They say even if borders were closed, they'd still have made their way to Europe with little intention of ever returning to Syria. What is your future?
I don't know.
You don't know where you'll live?
Really, I don't know.
How you'll survive? How you'll work?
I don't know yet.
The cataclysmic fears? The demand on social services too much. The economic strain on Europe could cripple it, and cities would lose an identity they've fought so hard to retain.
In this regard, it was an accident waiting to happen, and it happened.
And much of the anger directed not at the Middle East, but at America. What should America be doing differently?
Well, I think they just accepted to take 10,000. This is what we take every day, so maybe they take a bit more than 10,000.
They blame the US policy for refugees coming here, and these people don't want the refugees, and they don't want US foreign policy.